Hey everyone, I'm Carolyn. Welcome back to another episode of As I See It. So let's talk about Elon Musk and Twitter again because there have been some new developments. So last week when I did the video about Elon Musk buying about 9.4% of Twitter, I had said that he was going to be on the board of directors. Well, there's been a new development. He has turned down a seat on the board of directors of Twitter. And here's why it matters. When you're on the board of directors, you are bound by certain requirements and rules. I also heard that you're also open to being sued by the public and employees and things like that. There's a lot more liability when you're on the board versus just an owner, a shareholder. The board of an organization is responsible for the direction, the strategic direction and future planning of a company. And there is some liability there, apparently. And Elon Musk turned that down. The reason this is concerning to me is because as a board member, he would have been beholden to a code of conduct, which means he might have had to watch what he says on Twitter. He might have to watch about, what information he discloses, right? As a board member, here's the thing, as a board member, there's probably going to be NDAs and things like that, right? Because he's going to be involved in the strategic planning of the company. So he's going to be beholden to code of conduct and have to sign NDAs and not being able to talk about things publicly. As an owner, he's not bound to any of those rules. He can do whatever he wants. And as majority stakeholder, that means he can manipulate the narrative. He can, like he did with Tesla, and he got sued by the SEC for disclosing information that affected the stock prices of Tesla. So he basically has carte blanche, as far as I understand, as a major stakeholder and not a board member, to manipulate stock prices, to manipulate public perception, to make changes. So there's a lot going on here. In addition to not being held to a code of conduct by not being on the board, being a board member also means that you're limited to just a 14.9% stake in the company. He refused that limitation, which means right now he only owns 9.4. He's still a majority stakeholder. He can continue to buy stock. Anybody who's willing to sell it to him. And again, as not a board member, he can manipulate stock prices. He can go out on Twitter and tweet something that causes stock prices to go down, buy up everybody's stock, because they're like, oh my gosh, we're cratering. They're going to start selling off. He can start buying, and then he can say, oh yeah, okay, just kidding, and turn around and make a fortune off of that stock. He has a lot of control now to manipulate the market of Twitter. But besides that, as a majority stakeholder who has been very vocal about free speech, he also might have the ability to change all the hard work that Twitter has done to keep the platform safe from disinformation, misinformation, lies, dangerous information. He could completely turn that around. He could reinstate the former president. He could reinstate a lot of the other politicians and pundits who have been banned from Twitter for life for tweeting dangerous false information. I talked about that a little bit in the last video. And all of this under the guise of free speech, which, by the way, Congress shall institute no laws abridging free speech. That's a paraphrase. The First Amendment is about Congress. It's about the government not restricting our speech. It is not. The Founding Fathers never intended for that to mean private companies, that private companies aren't allowed to decide who gets to say what and do what on their platform using their service. Twitter had every right to ban the former guy. Musk didn't agree. He could turn that around. And why is that dangerous? So if he's really about the freedom of information. And the argument a lot of right-wing people like to use when they're talking about the First Amendment, they like to say, well, give us all the information, even the false information, even the propaganda, even the lies. People are smart enough to figure it out for themselves. They're not. This is why our country and many countries in the world are going through what they're going through right now. This is Russia right now. Is because the people who own the media own the narrative. They own the conversation. They can feed you whatever they want to feed you. And it doesn't necessarily mean, that you're dumb if you believe it. There's different types of thinking. Some people just can be very intelligent. A new study was just done, or I don't know if it was new, but there was a study done that showed that some of the smartest people are some of the most susceptible to fake news and false information. It's not about IQ so much. It's not about how smart you are. It's about how you think, how you process information. The ability to think critically is not necessarily tied to your level of intelligence. It's a different way of thinking. And let me just share a story with you, and I'll make one more point. So I went to, I went to school. I actually dropped out of high school, but that's another story. Got my GED, went to community college, then transferred to a 4-year university. I did not learn how to think critically until I transferred to a 4-year university. I went to Berkeley. Nobody before that taught me how to think critically. I was a good student up until I wasn't in high school. Another story. But in college, I was a good student, mostly A's and B's. Got to Berkeley, my first semester at Berkeley, and all of a sudden I was getting C's. I was getting C's on research papers. And I'm like, what? I've never gotten a C on a paper before. And my professors and TAs were saying, I don't want a book report. I was reading political philosophers, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Adams, economists, and they wanted me to come up with my own ideas and challenge and I'm like, they're smarter than me. These guys are famous philosophers and political scientists and economists, and you want me to come up with my own view that's not the same as theirs? I didn't get it. It took me more than a semester at Berkeley to get it. That, just because they're famous, just because they're known for these theories doesn't mean that I can't have my own, that I can't think critically about what they're saying. It took a while. I didn't learn it in high school. I didn't learn it in community college. I did not learn it until I went to 4-year university. And a lot of people on my other channel give me a lot of crap for being a Berkeley grad. Liberal, left-wing, brainwashed, blah, blah, blah. And I like to say that college didn't teach me what to think. It taught me how to think. So my point in telling you this is that critical thinking is not a skill that's taught enough in our society. And I talked recently in a video on my other channel about freedom. And I said, our education system teaches us how many of you had to memorize, right? Well, yeah, you memorize vocabulary, you memorize your times tables, you stand in line, you conform, you don't think outside the box. Critical thinking is thinking outside the box. Critical thinking is questioning. Well, why is 4 + 4 8? Why isn't it 9? We're not taught to ask that question. Just study your times tables. So if we are not a society that teaches critical thinking, that you can be intelligent without being a critical thinker, then we are going to be much more susceptible to fake information. And here's one more thought I want to leave you with. If Elon Musk really cares about society, and he bought a controlling share in Twitter because he really cares about America and Americans and the Constitution, then why isn't he investing his money in educating us? You know what? That's fine. If we had an educated population, if we had a society that pays teachers as much as football players, then fine. I'd be okay with, allowing the former guy to be on Twitter. But we don't. We don't invest enough in education. We don't pay our teachers enough. Teachers have to do fundraisers and bake sales for school supplies while we have a multi-billionaire buying Twitter just because. If he really cared about our society and doing what's best for our society under the guise of free speech, He spent $3 billion to buy 9% of Twitter. You know what that $3 billion could have bought? The 1,000 schools in the United States that are the poorest 1,000 schools. Graduation rates are low, teachers are paid the less, the schools, buildings are falling apart, and there's mold, there's no books, in the classroom, there's not enough books, or there's outdated books, there's 50 people in a classroom. The poorest 1,000 schools in the country. Elon Musk, if he really cared about our country and really cared about what's best for America and Americans, he could have taken that $3 billion and given those 1,000 schools $3 million each. $3 million to 1,000 of the lowest income, poorest schools. If he really cared about America and Americans, wouldn't that be a much wiser investment? Investing in an educated and intelligent and critical thinking population? It's not what he did, though. He bought a social media platform. Why? Control. Power. Because he can. Something to think about. Leave your comments below, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for being here, and be sure to subscribe.